Las Vegas, 1962. The phone call came at midnight, cutting through the desert silence. Nat King Cole was in his suite at the Flamingo Hotel, exhausted from 2 shows that evening, still in his performance tuxedo with the bow tie loosened and hanging around his neck. His throat was raw from singing, his feet ached from standing. He poured himself a scotch, the first of the night, a ritual to help him wind down, when his manager Carlos Gastel knocked urgently on the door. Not a polite knock, an urgent one, the kind that said something important was happening. Nat opened the door to find Carlos holding a telephone receiver, the cord stretched taut from the hallway jack, his face showing an expression Nat had seen before, barely contained excitement mixed with apprehension. The look of a man holding what might be either a winning lottery ticket or live grenade. "It's the Sands," Carlos said, voice tight and controlled in the way that meant he was trying very hard not to shout. "They want to make an offer, a serious offer." Nat's first thought was practical. It was midnight. Legitimate business offers didn't come at midnight. Midnight calls meant either emergency or something so sensitive it couldn't wait for office hours. He took the receiver but didn't speak into it yet. "What kind of offer?" he asked Carlos quietly. Carlos took a breath, and Nat saw his manager's hand trembling slightly. In 15 years of working together, Nat had rarely seen Carlos nervous. "They want you for a private event, corporate entertainment, high rollers, invitation-only audience. That's not unusual. The fee is unusual." "How unusual?" Carlos met his eyes. $1 million. For a single performance, 20 minutes of material. No album required, no promotional obligations, just 20 minutes on stage. The number hung in the air between them. $1 million in 1962 wasn't just money, it was transformative wealth, equivalent to nearly 10 million in today's currency. The kind of sum that ended financial worries permanently. That secured Natalie's future through college and beyond. That let Maria live comfortably regardless of what happened to Nat's career or health. For 20 minutes of work, for doing what he did every night anyway, standing on a stage and singing songs he'd performed thousands of times. Nat felt the weight of that number, felt it like gravity pulling at him. He was 43 years old. He'd been performing professionally for over 20 years. He'd made good money, but he'd also spent freely on maintaining his image, on his family's lifestyle, on the expenses of being Nat King Cole. He wasn't broke, but he wasn't sitting on reserves that would last forever either. $1 million would change everything. "What's the catch?" Nat asked quietly, already knowing there had to be one. Nobody offered that kind of money without conditions. Carlos hesitated. That hesitation told Nat everything he needed to know. "The audience," Carlos said carefully. "It's a private event, invitation only, and they want it. They want the audience restricted to whites only," Nat finished. They didn't say it explicitly. They said exclusive clientele and maintaining certain standards, and Carlos, "It's a segregated audience." "Yes." Nat looked at his manager, a man who'd guided his career for over a decade, who'd helped him become one of the highest paid entertainers in America, who genuinely cared about his success. "Tell them no." Nat, just listen, "no. It's $1 million for 20 minutes. You could secure Natalie's future, Maria's future. You could. I could also break the promise I made after Birmingham. I said I would never perform for a segregated audience again. Never. That wasn't conditional on the money being right. It was absolute." That was 6 years ago. The world has changed, not enough, and my word hasn't changed at all. The Sands offer was refused. $1 million walked away from, for a principle. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Before we dive into the story of how Nat King Cole turned down over $5 million in his career by refusing to perform for segregated audiences, and why he chose to die with a clean name instead of a fortune built on compromise, let me ask you, what's your price? What would you sell for $1 million? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because this story about integrity when it costs everything is as relevant today as it was 60 years ago. The Birmingham attack had changed Nat fundamentally. Before April 10, 1956, he'd rationalized performing for segregated audiences. It was just business, he'd told himself. He wasn't endorsing segregation by taking their money. He was just an entertainer doing his job. Then 4 white supremacists had rushed his stage, grabbed him mid-song, tried to kidnap him. And Nat had realized that all his rationalizations were lies, that performing for segregated audiences was participating in his own oppression. That taking their money made him complicit. The day after the attack, he'd made his promise, never again. His manager had warned him what that would cost. The South is half your bookings. You're walking away from hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Then I walk away. Other venues will use it as leverage. They'll offer you less because they know you've limited your options. Let them. You have a family to support. Natalie needs a father who stands for something. Not one who sells his dignity for the highest bidder. The immediate financial impact had been brutal. Within a month, Nat lost over $500, $0 in canceled Southern bookings. Venues that had eagerly wanted him suddenly went silent. Radio stations in some markets stopped playing his records. But that was just the beginning. What most people never knew was that the financial cost of Nat's principal extended far beyond canceled tour. For the rest of his life, from 1956 until his death in 1965, Nat received regular offers to break his promise. Massive offers, life-changing amounts of money, and he turned them all down. The Sands offer in 1962 was just one of many. There was the Dallas hotel magnate who offered $750, $0 for a single private concert in 1958. Segregated audience, Nat refused. The Atlanta businessman who wanted Nat to perform at his daughter's wedding in 1960, offering $500, $0 for 30 minutes. The guest list would be whites only. Nat refused. The Mississippi Casino Consortium that offered $2 million for a weekend residency in 1963. The venue's policy prohibited black patrons. Nat refused. A Miami Beach resort that wanted him for their grand opening in 1964. Offering $800, $0 plus accommodations. Integrated performers allowed but segregated audience seating. Nat refused. Each offer came with the same arguments from Carlos and other advisors. This is different. This is private. This is just business. This amount of money changes everything. Your family's future, your security, your legacy. And each time Nat's answer was the same. My legacy is my word, and my word was never. By conservative estimate, Nat turned down over $5 million in performance fees between 1956 and 1965. In 1960s dollars, the equivalent of over $45 million today. For a man with a family to support, expensive tastes, and health problems that would eventually require costly treatment, that was generational wealth. That was security. That was the difference between dying with something to leave his daughter and dying with medical debt. Nat chose the debt, but the cost wasn't just financial. It was personal, emotional, physical. It was the slow erosion of watching opportunities pass by, knowing each one represented not just money but security. Every refused offer was a conversation with Maria, his wife, about whether they were doing the right thing. Late-night conversations in their bedroom after Natalie was asleep where they did the math. Where they calculated what $500, $0 would mean for their daughter's education. What $750, $0 would mean for their retirement. What $1 million would mean for their security. I support you, Maria would say, and she meant it. She'd never once pressured him to break his promise, but he could see the fear in her eyes, see her doing the mental arithmetic that kept her awake at night. How many refused? Bookings equaled Natalie's college education at the best schools. How many principals equaled the kind of financial cushion that meant Maria wouldn't have to worry if something happened to Nat? I know you support me, Nat would say, but that doesn't make this easier. Nothing about being Nat King Cole has ever been easy. That's not new. But I'm choosing to make it harder. I'm choosing to turn down money we could use. That makes it different. Maria would take his hand. You're choosing to live by your values. That's not the same as making things harder. That's making things right. But Nat felt the weight every time he said no to another massive offer, felt it accumulating like pressure behind a dam. Each refusal was another ton of water pushing against his resolve, testing whether his principles were strong enough to hold. Pressure intensified in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Other entertainers knew he was turning down these offers. Word got around in the industry, and their reactions varied from respect to resentment. Some admired him, followed his example, used his choices as permission to make similar stands. Others resented him, felt he was making them look weak by comparison, setting a standard they couldn't match or didn't want to. Making it harder for them to rationalize taking segregated bookings when everyone knew Nat Cole had walked away from millions rather than compromise. You're making the rest of us look bad, one performer told him privately at an industry event, not hostile but honest. I'm not trying to make anyone look like anything, Nat replied. I'm just trying to live with myself. Well, your choices make it harder for those of Us who have different priorities, who have families to support and can't afford your principles. Nat didn't argue, didn't point out that he also had a family to support, also had financial pressures, also had reasons to compromise, because arguing would have been defensive and defense suggested doubt. Nat had no doubt, the cost was real, but the choice remained clear. The pressure intensified in 1964 when Nat was diagnosed with lung cancer. He'd been a heavy smoker for decades, 3 packs a day, a habit that had defined his adult life. The cancer was aggressive, already advanced when they found it. The treatment would be expensive, experimental procedures, the best specialists, everything that might extend his life or ease his suffering. Nat's financial situation wasn't dire, but it wasn't comfortable either. He'd made good money over his career, but he'd also spent freely on his family, on his lifestyle, on maintaining the appearance of success. The refused bookings had taken their toll. There wasn't the kind of reserve most people assumed a celebrity of his stature would have. When the cancer diagnosis came, Carlos brought up something he'd been holding back. There are still offers coming in, he said carefully. People who want to book you before, while you can still perform. Segregated venues. Some of them, yes, then the answer is still no. Nat, you have cancer. The treatment is expensive. You have maybe a year, maybe 2 if the treatment works. Don't I think what? That dying rich is better than dying with integrity. That I should spend my last year breaking the promise that defined my second career. That I should teach Natalie that principles only matter when they're convenient. I think you should consider that your family will need resources after you're gone. Nat was quiet for a long time. Then, I'd rather leave Natalie a name that stood for something than a fortune built on compromise. She can make her own money. She can't make her own character, but she can inherit mine. Carlos never brought it up again. Nat died on February 15, 1965. He was 45 years old. The cancer had spread despite aggressive treatment. The medical bills had consumed much of his savings. He left his family comfortable but not wealthy, not secure in the way that $5 million in refused bookings might have secured them. At his funeral, thousands of people lined up to pay respects. The tributes focused not on his wealth or his chart success, but on his character, his integrity, his refusal to compromise. He was a man who knew what he stood for, Harry Belafonte said, and he stood for it even when it cost him everything. Maria, widowed at 40, was asked by a reporter whether she regretted the financial choices they'd made, whether she wished Nat had taken some of those enormous offers. Not for a second, she said. He died knowing he'd lived by his values. How many people can say that? How many would trade that knowledge for money? But privately, Maria struggled, not with regret exactly, but with the practical reality of raising a teenage daughter alone without the financial cushion that $5 million could have provided. Natalie was 15 when her father died, old enough to remember him clearly, old enough to understand that he'd been offered enormous amounts of money to perform for segregated audiences and had refused every time. Why? She asked her mother once. Why did he say no? We could have used that money. Couldn't he have made an exception? Maria thought carefully before answering. Your father believed that some things couldn't be sold, that his word mattered more than money, that if he broke his promise once, it stopped being a promise and became a suggestion. He wanted you to inherit integrity. He believed that was worth more than cash. But integrity doesn't pay for college. No, but your father's name opens doors that money can't. Because people know what kind of man he was. That's his real inheritance to you. Natalie didn't fully understand at 15. How could she? She was a teenager who just lost her father, watching her mother struggle financially, knowing that her dad had turned down millions that would have made everything easier. It would take years for her to appreciate what he'd actually given her. In the late 1970s, Natalie was building her own music career. She had talent inherited from her father, shaped by years of training. But she also had something else, a name that meant something. When promoters learned she was Nat King Cole's daughter, the response was always the same. Your father was a man of principle. We respect that. She got bookings other artists couldn't get, got second chances when recordings didn't perform, got benefit of the doubt because people assumed she'd inherited her father's character. One booking made it clear. Natalie was offered a residency at a major Las Vegas venue in 1978. During contract negotiations, the representative made an unusual comment. We wouldn't have made this offer if you were anyone else at your current level, but your father's reputation carries weight. We know the Cole family doesn't compromise. That means something to us. Natalie realized then what her father had actually left her. Not money, reputation, trust, a name that opened doors because people believed it stood for integrity. She'd inherited something money couldn't buy. The full scope of Nat's refused bookings only became clear years after his death. Biographers researching his career discovered the pattern of massive offers consistently declined. The numbers were staggering. Over his career, conservative estimates put refused segregated bookings at over $5 million in 1960s currency. If he'd accepted even half, his estate would have been worth tens of millions in modern terms. Instead, he died leaving his family modest comfort and an invaluable reputation. The biographers interviewed Carlos Gastel in the 1970s, asking about those refused offers. Did he ever waver? Once, Carlos admitted, when he was diagnosed, I brought it up. He shut me down immediately. Told me he'd rather die broke with integrity intact than live another year as someone who'd broken his word. Did you think he was foolish? Carlos paused. At the time, sometimes yes. I was his manager. My job was maximizing earnings. But looking back, I understand he was protecting something more valuable than money. The story of Nat's refused offers became part of his legend, but it also raised uncomfortable questions that the music industry didn't want to address. If one man could walk away from millions to avoid performing for segregated audiences, what did it say? About the artists who didn't, about the performers who took those bookings, took that money, rationalized their participation in segregation as just business. Nat's choices implicitly criticized everyone who chose differently, made them look weak, complicit, willing to sell their principles for the right price. Some resented him for it, privately called him self-righteous, suggested he'd only made those choices because he was already successful enough to afford principles. But that argument didn't hold, because the offers kept coming even as his health declined, even as his financial needs increased. The temptation was constant, the pressure was real, and he never broke. In the 1980s, a journalist asked Sammy Davis Jr. about Nat's legacy. He set a standard, Sammy said, made it impossible for the rest of us to claim we had. No choice, because Nat proved you always have a choice. It just might cost you everything. Do you think he made the right choice? I think he made the only choice he could live with. That's all anyone can do. Today, with everything we know about Nat's career and principles, the $1 million offer from the Sands in 1962 stands out as emblematic. $1 million, 20 minutes, generational wealth for less than half an hour of work. But Nat didn't struggle, he refused immediately, because 6 years earlier in Birmingham he'd made a promise, and that promise wasn't conditional, it was absolute. The lesson isn't that money doesn't matter. Medical bills matter. Natalie's education mattered. Maria's security mattered. Nat knew all of that, felt the weight of all of it. The lesson is that some things cost more than their worth, that breaking your word has a price that exceeds any payment. That integrity, once sold, can't be bought back. Nat chose to die at 45 with medical debt and modest savings rather than live another year as someone who'd compromised his values for cash. That choice echoes across decades. Because in 2026, we're still asking the same questions. What's your price? What would you sell? What principles would you abandon if the money was right? Nat King Cole answered those questions definitively, not with words but with choices, with refused offers, with walked away from millions. His daughter Natalie inherited a modest estate and an invaluable name. She built her own career partly on talent, partly on the reputation her father had protected instead of the fortune he could have accumulated. When she died in 2015, her obituaries mentioned her father's character alongside her own achievements. The Cole name still stood for integrity, still opened doors, still carried weight. That was Nat's real inheritance, not cash, character, proof that some things can't be sold because they're priceless. The $1 million offer from the Sands, that was just the most dramatic example. Real story was the cumulative weight of every refused booking, every walked away from fortune, every time Nat chose his word over his wallet. $5 million in 1960s money, refused, because of who was in the audience, because the audience was wrong, because no amount of money could make segregation right. And somewhere in that pattern of refusals, Nat King Cole taught a lesson that's still relevant. You don't get to keep your integrity and sell it too. You choose. With your choice, he chose, and he died with his choice intact. The fortune he walked away from would have been nice, But the name he left behind was priceless. Ask Natalie. Ask anyone who's built something on the foundation of a reputation that money can't buy. They'll tell you Nat made the right choice, not the profitable choice, the right one, and sometimes that's the only choice worth making.